Well, this is Dr. Chris Lemmon, and I'm looking at October chat. And so last month, I talked a little bit about uh, influence, and I got a lot of questions back. So I kind of want to answer the questions. And I think to do that, I got to kind of step back even farther and talk about uh, where this differentiation came from. A lot of people call it psychic tools or energy work or whatever terms they have in play. My whole concept with my background was that we we have put together, we see things as symbols, and we have put together terms that define those symbols in our language so that we can communicate. That's the whole idea of language, right? We can take a word that we can take a word and we can try to translate it into, say, an English word translated into French. And then when we try to, my background screen doesn't seem to be very friendly today. And then when we want to translate it back into English again, it doesn't translate back. It's just there's an assumption that a certain concept, a certain idea that we have associated with a symbol that means some shape or design is the same for everybody. It's not the same in real objects. It's not the same. And you're going to run that same gamut even worse when you get into emotional pieces. If somebody says, I'm frightened, we're just like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how frightened are you? It's like, and even that doesn't tell you anything because it's their scale, not your scale. It's really tough to get the emotional piece that down packed. So when working with energy in the classes we taught was to become aware of how much energy is associated with this state you're in right now. So when we talk about structure, we talk about objects that we've labeled and they have an identity to them. If we start to talk about how I feel about something, emotional piece, then we're really starting to talk about a an abstract piece. It's not easily defined. So when we work with energy, we can start to feel how much energy is flowing. And we start to see how much energy is flowing. Then we start to give you a real quick example. I was going to look at some waterfalls in Oregon with some friends. I walked up the hill. I'm kind of a fast walker, so I just told my friends, hey, I'll see you at the top. I don't like to drag along and chat. I'm just kind of like, so I just zoomed up to a bridge that was halfway up the waterfall. And I get to the top, I look over, and there's a lady, a mom, and she's got a little boy that's, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years old, whatever. And he's frightened. He's hanging on to the wall and he's just scared to death of height. So I walk over to him. I ignore her completely. I walk over and look at him and say, look at me. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm a fireman. I'm climb ladders. I'm not afraid of height at all. Take my hand and go with me out on that bridge. There's nothing to worry about because I can handle anything. And he just looked at me and I put my hand out and he took my hand and she didn't say a word. And I took him right out on the bridge. And I stood out there and says, hang on to me. I'm not frightened at all. Feel that. And he goes, oh my gosh. And it's just like the first time in his life, he could reference a different model than what he would lived in. Nobody understood that he wasn't under his fright, his fear was not translated. And everybody was talking about from their model. It's like they didn't understand. I totally understood his fear. I said, match me, is what I was saying in the best way I could for this little kid. He just totally holding on to me, like in train. He got out there and I said, now hold on to the wall. And if you get intimidated, grab me. I'm standing right here. And we'll watch the waterfall. We'll watch the water go on. We'll stand there for a while. And next thing you know, he's looking down. I said, look down for a second, but look back up again. Looking down's not a good idea if you're afraid of heights. But you're just getting used to it. So start to play with it a little bit, get adjusted to it. And so that's what he was doing. He was getting adjusted to it. His mother's still standing over there watching, not saying a word. Right? It's kind of interesting. So finally, the rest of the family got there and they all came over to join. And they're all in a state of shock that I got him out there. And he's standing there, brave and courageous, because now he starts to understand he was running way too much energy through his fear. Should you be afraid of height? Yes, you should be afraid of heights. My gosh, you can get hurt. You should be, but not to the point it disables you. He just needed a reference of how much he was allowed to have, how much he was allowed to express in that whole experience. And so that's what he was playing with. So as he played with that, he got more and more confident. It was the first time in his life that he did it. So I looked around and I said, okay, we all good? And everybody says, yeah, yeah. And I look at him, I said, are you good? Are you going to be able to get off of there? Or do you want me to walk you off? And his dad says, oh, I got him. I says, I'm not too sure that I asked you. I think I asked your son. And I looked at him and said, you want me to walk you off? And he said, yes. And I got his hand and I walked him off. And I got him to the edge. I said, now, how do you feel? And he said, I think I could walk back out again. I said, okay, if you want to. So he walked out towards his family. They were already coming towards him. So he met them, but he wasn't intimidated. He didn't want anybody to hold his hand. He turned around and he walked off. I headed down the hill. And when I got down the hill, my friends came up. They did their sightseeing and they went down the hill. I was down the hill standing with my friends when he walked by and I waved at him. And he looked over at me and looked away. He didn't even recognize me. He didn't recognize me. He was totally related to the model I was presenting him. It wasn't like he identified me physically. He was looking at the energy model. So I know this is hard to get into your head. That's the nature of influence. That's why when you're born and you're a child, you are simply nothing but a bundle of influence. Everything is influencing you. You don't have any idea what's right or wrong, what is correct, what is going on. And so parents and culture, which is what brought the parents up, and language structure, and all that was then taught to you. You were modeled into you. And if that modeling went well, you were a balanced person. If it didn't go well for whatever reason, there's a million different reasons. It's not all in a language structure. It's not recorded in a dialogue. It's recorded in symbols. And so there's symbols and patterns in there. There's no way to take a picture and translate it. We can do an fMRI, but that just tells you where blood flow is. And it's assumed that if blood is flowing to a certain part of your brain, that's the part that's being activated by this. It doesn't tell you very much, really. It doesn't. And so you really have to sit with someone or have sat with a lot of different people to start to understand the dynamics of what's going on. So when we teach classes, we're teaching classes, the assumption is you're already influencing something in the world and that is occurring. So now the best way have, let me turn this a little bit and see if we can get a little, stop the blinking in the background. Okay, yeah, I'm not going to stop it. So it's going to be whatever it's going to be. All right. So it's just that energy flow is the way that I found that if I sit and start to monitor energy flow, I can find if they're flowing too much energy, too little energy, and I start to get a feel for that. Everybody that I've ever taught and played with can get a feel for that. People just naturally start to notice that, right? And they'll get a hit on that. So that's kind of what we call energy work in my terminology. Everyone else has other ideas, whatever they believe in. I don't like to put taboos on how they believe in because that's how they access it. If they believe in past lives, if they believe in a dead relative talking to them, if they believe they've got a guide out there, if they believe in spaces, whatever they believe in, then that is the way it starts to communicate some aspect of your relationship to life that you can't otherwise get because it's not structured in form. It's emoted. It feels a certain way, and it's hard to put that in language. So whatever idea you have, I don't say, hey, that's wrong. Fine, go with whatever you got, and let's utilize that. What I found is people start to get a new relationship to energy flow. They start to trust the feeling in their body much, much better than the story they had before. It wasn't just the fact that the story was wrong or right. Imagination is neither wrong nor right. It's not part of structured world. It's just simply the ability to create an idea. So if you created an idea, is that right or wrong? Well, in the structured world, it's always going to be wrong. But if it's useful, then it's not wrong. So you start to take a look and you have to get out of that right or wrong thinking. You have to utilize whatever's there to be able to expand and to grow and to be able to uh, entertain a new idea, a new potential, and move in that direction. You have to kind of flow with it. So don't get too judgmental on it. Yeah. Some of these people turn everything into a religion. A religion just means an idea that's not secured in fact, right? There are today scientists that are trying to turn things that are not quite a fact, in other words, not quite proven. They're comparing it to other things that aren't quite proven to be able to prove them, right? This is the kind of the age we're getting into. It's like it's a little bit of vagueness. We will move through this just like in history. If you look back in history, all the way back into whatever literature you can get as far back 1600, 1400, whenever the literature you get, people still had to deal with emotional issues. People had to deal with animosity, of competition, of jealousy, of feeling frightened, of feeling scared. It was always there. So it's an emotional piece. It's the way we act. We can analyze the thalamus. We can say, oh, it all comes in here. It's like, yeah, that doesn't really tell you very much of how to deal with it. So my idea of putting together influences and starting to play with them is just to get aware of something that's operating that we don't have a very good structure to be able to look at that. Yes, I have a background in psychology. We can look at that. I could define it. I could put a term down. I could get the book out and look it up and see if the medical term and where it's diagnosable. All those were great tools, but it did make it easier to fix. That's the tough part. So we're really looking at how do you get more out of life, right? Everything that happens is an influence. It affects you one way or the other. I just went to I'm redoing my garage floor right now, and I just went to get another can of the cement coat I've got on it. And I got to the store and I'm looking at it. It says, okay, I need a can of gray. So I went to the store and I picked up a can of gray and I looked there and on the shelf, they had two kinds of gray, a slate gray and a silver gray. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, when I bought this can last week, the shelf was really low and they only had like one or two cans of the one I bought that said gray on it. I didn't pay attention to the first part. So I'm sitting there saying, oh, should I go back home and take a look? Should I? And I'm going, no, I don't need to do that. I really need to go within myself and say, am I afraid of making a mistake? My gosh, if I make a mistake, I just bring the can back and trade it. That's not a problem. But if I have to go home and then come back because I don't trust in myself, now that's the silliness. If I make a mistake, it's okay. If I'm afraid to make a mistake, it's a problem. Do you see how the difference is? I had to take a breath and say, I'm not afraid to make a mistake. It's okay if I get the wrong can. It's okay if I have to make a trip back. If I have to make a trip back to validate myself before I make a decision to buy it, now I'm condemning myself to failure. I don't want to take that action, right? Why should I? So just take a breath. Which one should I get? All right, I'll grab this one. Not a problem. I go pay for it. I come home. I look at the labels and it's like, yep, it's the same one. I was right on. Just because it wasn't in my memory banks, it wasn't stored completely. I didn't have the same exact terms because he had stocked the shelves. Doesn't mean that I couldn't make a discernment. I had to find that piece of trust with me. If I couldn't find that in there, then it would have been wise to go home and make a decision. But I found that piece of trust. I just said, hey, I got this. And worst case scenario, I'm wrong. I just come back and fix it. It's simple. That's the way we work with emoting pieces, right? We start to take a look. We say, how far will I push this? There are some, there are, I had a friend of mine tell me a great story. He's kind of a, he's kind of a really big guy, and he was a car salesman, and so he's kind of loud, obnoxious, and a big guy, all the above. And he's a character. Yeah, I knew him because he had a drinking problem, so we were kind of working together. But he went to with his family, went on vacation to Hawaii, and they were up looking at a waterfall. And he was kind of surprised as he walked out to the edge. It was just a sheer, and there was no fence or railing or anything. This is back a few years. I don't know how it is today, but he's looking at this waterfall and he says, "Oh my God, there should be a railing or something here." It's a good thing it was early in the morning when he went up there, and his wife and kids didn't want to go along. It was cold up in the top of the mountain in that time of year. So he went up there to look at it. And there's an older lady that came over that must have been like my age, and she's kind of not too stable. And she walks over and she started to fall. And he reached down and grabbed her and pulled her back up. And when she got her footing down, she turned around and slapped him. He's kind of like startled. And then she walked away, mumbling to herself, like she'd been accosted by someone, but he had actually saved her life. And I remember him sitting there telling me the story, and he says, "What did I do wrong? You see the trick in emotion." I said, "You didn't do anything wrong. She translated the experience different than you translated the experience. There was no word that covers that. You can't say, 'I saved your life.' She had a total different experience of that than you did. A matter of fact, if somebody was to come along and talk to her, she would probably say, 'You pushed her off the edge,' and she had to pull herself back, or some silliness like that. Her interpretation was different. This is because we're talking about a movement experience. That means it took emotion. Energy had to flow to get movement. She took a step closer to the edge to see down, and she just wasn't paying enough attention or couldn't pay enough attention. And he saved her. It's kind of interesting. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to become better connected as a group of people on a planet. When we were tribal people in the very beginning, eons ago, we just were all relatives for the most part. Well, I think we've all had enough problems with relatives to know that didn't work out really good. Then we started finding other reasons to connect. So we had criterions of kind of a quasi-religious thing, so belief in a certain thing, belief in symbols, a belief in an ability to throw a spear or to use a weapon, or childcare or whatever, right? And all those criterions then become a collective element. And so now we still have today, people will join a club, people will all belong to the same hobby, people will all connect on some element, right? As we move forward, if we're going to eventually become a global people, then then we're going to have to find the idea of being the earth, being the connective piece. That's a really big genre when we don't even have a language that translates very universally for all of that. It's going to be a ways to go, but I think that's the target for us as humanity, to be able to say, hey, in this universe, as far as we can tell, there's no other humans that meet our criterion that we can find. And so it's like, my goodness. And we also know that this little ball of dust floating through space that we're standing on uh, is deteriorating to some relative degree if our information is correct. So we may have to relocate somewhere. So yes, maybe it's thousands and thousands of years from now, but it's something we have to start working towards, right? All those things are absolutely true or not true. Who knows, right? Who knows, whatever. I've been on the planet 81 years, and I'm just going to tell you, it's really changed tremendously. I mean, very different, very different world. Uh, and I'm looking at adjusting, and I'm looking at the increases we have. Did we gain a lot from computers and cell phones? Yeah, kind of. But now we've got a big problem with bot traffic and corruption, and it's like, now what do we secure into again? Do you see we're back to the kid on a bridge? What do we secure into? So those becomes the questions. Okay, so I'm answering a lot of questions in a backwards way uh, in the story index. One of the big things I had questions on were was psychic attacks. Um, you know, there are a lot of things that you don't address because you're maybe fearful of them. Uh, you maybe are afraid of height, or maybe you get lost easy because you're not directional. You know, um, uh, everybody has an oddity to them. Growing up as a kid, I I found that um, I got distracted really, really easy. First grade, second grade, I was just got distracted. I looked around for whatever else. first grade, I got caught because the teacher would turn to the board and be writing on the board. I would get up out of my seat and go hide behind the piano. And she would be teaching class and never realize I disappeared. And I just did it for fun. And the other kids would look over and think, what am I, crazy or something? Right? I actually got some girl to come hide behind the piano with me for a whole way through class. And I gave her a kiss behind the piano in first grade. And that kind of like startled her. uh, but we didn't get caught. We both got back to our seat when the teacher turned again. It was kind of interesting. I have no idea why all that occurred. I have no clue. No, but it was a real experience. Um, so what I realized is that this asking questions and answering was a game that they were playing. To me, in first grade, in my mind, it was a game. So I would take my book that they gave me home. I'd have my grandmother who liked reading, so she would read the book to me. I would memorize it. And so I didn't read. I knew on page 12 exactly what it said. I memorized the whole book. That was easier than reading to me. So I never read a book until I got to my senior year in high school. So still to this day, drives my wife nuts. I say, well, you go down the road here and you get to a street that starts with an S. I don't read. I mean, I can read. I read a book a week now. I read a lot. Once I started reading, I became an avid reader. But before that, I got used to not reading. So when I look at something, I just looked at the first letter. Just by defense, if you have a warning sign up, I might glance and see the sign, but I don't particularly read it. Right. I don't just automatically read things. It's an assumption that people say, do you see the sign? I'm going like, it says, I don't know, whatever it says keep out or something. I don't know. Let's go. And they go, but it's like, but what? Let's just go. Right. Like, I'm okay. I feel okay. Let's go. I'm listening to something inside me. I'm good here. Right. Um, so I just had a different set of markers. Do you understand this? This is just like, and I'm just using myself as an example. I have worked with thousands of people and I could give them all examples, but some people get a little upset if I talk about me without their name on it. So I just use my name it's like, I'm just a model. Nobody's perfect. It's just like it works out ever how it works out for you. Um, so we look at those because we're looking at states of being when it comes to emotion. How do you feel about that? What does that state do for you? I bring up the word emotion and my back screen seems to go crazy. Who knows? Probably too much energy coming from my body. It could be anything. Do you see how we can make up any story because we don't know? We don't have, it's not factual. It's not 2 + 2 is 4. And yet, every one of you can go find a book that tells you the faults in our mathematics. It's a descriptive language that has a lot to do with structure. It works out good, but there's some fallacies in it, right? It's just it's very, very strange when you have like math. It's kind of like we can't figure out exactly where prime numbers are. We have formulas that give you more or less, but we can't find where prime numbers are. But yet, a young guy about 17 years old came up with a formula to find prime numbers in a ley line in a different dimension that all line up straight. And they just kind of bleed through into ours in a random piece. I don't know. That sounds like a crazy ass story to me, but you start to see it's kind of like, wow, that a different dimension, right? Like, what is that? That's almost like talking, but when they're talking about dimensions, they're talking about a different relationship in mathematics, not so much somebody living on another planet, right? So that same term, dimensionality, starts to be used in a different sort of way. But if you don't know that and read it in a book, you think, oh my goodness, like what's going on? This is what makes things confusing, right? So you have to start with yourself. How do you relate into experience? How do you show up? Where's your confidence at? How you have to listen to yourself to be safe. So you start to recognize, oh, I can do this and this is going to work out really good, or I could do something totally different. So I've got to kind of play with it and see where it's going to be comfortable for me. Where is this going to play into? How's this going to work out for me? Right. And you have to have that conversation within yourself to be able to, And if you can't have that conversation, if the emotional charge is too large, then you need to sit down with someone and have someone help you. And that's all fine and good. Um, Psychology doesn't have a really high heal rate, but they have at least um, um, broke things down into easier to diagnose patterns. You got a book now, you can look something up. So then there's some protocols, there's some structure that has come into play for this whole piece that's helped somewhat. All right. So, um, so the psychic attack we talked about is you're having an experience of some sort. Maybe you just tapped into someone else you were maybe unconsciously staring at, and they have a huge amount of fear. You don't see them as trembling, but they sit with this nightmare all the time. They're on guard all the time. And next thing you know, you're thinking about them, and that fright comes into you. You just made a connection to someone. Uh, you know, it's really nice when you see someone you think, oh, that person's attractive. Be nice to know them. They're nice looking. And the person turns and smiles at them. You say, oh, now you feel good. It's kind of like, wow, that's really positive. But then you see someone and they look a little frightening, and then they turn and they kind of growl, and it's like, wow, that's so interesting. Um, I did a little piece with a group. We were sitting in a coffee shop, 4 or 5 students, and I said, so I want to show you a demonstration on influence. And so let's look around in the Starbucks here. And we're all got a cup of coffee. And I said, see over there by the window, there's a couple. They're old like me, you know. Well, I think they weren't quite as old as I am. The man is sitting there reading a paper, and the woman is sitting there looking at her coffee. They both got a cup of coffee. They went in to get coffee. He's reading his paper, and she's looking at the coffee, thinking, ah, you know, life is like, I'm bored. Um, and I said, so let's change their state. And they're looking at me. I said, so she wants some attention, some communication is what she wants. She's sitting there. He's reading the paper. He don't care she exists. She wants some attention. She all of a sudden feels like they should be communicating. The two of them are sitting on a private table having a cup of coffee. He should be looking at her and talking. So let's instill that concept into him. We can send it as a picture. We can communicate it, whatever, but just allow that. It doesn't mean that we're harming him. It doesn't mean that we're just putting an influence out, a suggestion. Hey, dude, why don't you say hi to your partner there, smile, and talk to her for a few minutes? So we sent that out. My students are all looking at me like, yeah, this is going to work. And we all watched. And the guy put his paper down and starts talking to his wife. And they're drinking their coffee and they're talking a little bit. And so I said, now pull your attention back and see if you got the lesson. And as soon as we pulled our attention back, you saw him open a paper and go back to it and ignore her. It's like, okay. So you start to see you're not controlling anybody here. We're not controlling anybody. God, get this controlling thing out of your head. We're not controlling anybody. We're influencing them. It's just like a sales pitch. If somebody gives you a sales pitch and you buy, did they control you? You made the decision somewhere. Yes, they might have found some triggers. It might have maneuvered you a little bit, but that's because you didn't know yourself very well. So if you'd spend some time in meditation, if you'd spend some time doing some type of an exercise with your energy or some awareness, you would then start to know yourself better and you wouldn't be subject to all those components. That starts to make some sense. So when I start to talk about a composite of bringing several ideas and movement and diversity of energy, you start to see it affects my computer monitor. It affects everybody because it's kind of like having the heater on in the middle of summer. It gets warmer in the room, right? It's like it starts to have an effect upon it. It starts to influence it, right? And that's the dynamic that starts to occur. Um, um, all right. I'm not going to tell a whole bunch of stories. I think we got the idea. It's um, so many people have come to me and they said, "Oh, this person down the hallway, they're attacking me every night," and they're just like, "I don't address that." I start out with saying, "How does that feel in your body? Where is that coming from?" So How would you create that feeling if we were to not have it come from them? If we were have it to come, say, from the picture I have hanging on a wall. There's a picture of a bird on the wall. What if that bird sent the same message to you? How would that feel? Like, see, I'm playing off of their fantasy, right? Not saying their fantasy is not real. I'm just saying it's not logical. So they can't live in a logical world if they have a mental state where they're constantly in fear or can't function. So we're trying to get them functional. So she starts to say, oh my goodness, but it feels a little different from the bird. Oh, okay. That's good. Now she's got a discernment. It's not a question whether it's real or not. It's a question of how does it relate to you? Do you see how influence is really important? How it relates to you is what counts, not the reality. How it relates to you, that's the piece that you have to get a handle on for yourself. You got to get a handle on where that feels with you. And it's not always easy, like the young man on a bridge. Sometimes someone has to hold your hand. All right, that's enough said. I've kind of gone on and on and on, and I'm good at doing that over and over and over again. I found in life that you've got to tell a story and tell a story and tell a story until everybody in a class is vibrating at the same place. And you go, okay, now we got it all. There's not everybody can translate from that same story. So it's been fun talking. If you have any questions, please email me, Chris, that's CHRISS, two S's, at wizardscatch.com, WIZARDSCACHE. I'd be glad to answer your questions. And I've included a lot of answers in here I had on influence. So thank you much for your time, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next month.